Alright, in this video we're going to cover Lab 6 for CIT 325. Let's take a look at the objectives that we have for Lab 6. This week we want to dive into the PL/SQL error handling. You've been exposed to this lightly with the exception blocks to your PL/SQL anonymous blocks. We want to dive in a little bit further. We want to show you how you can generate your own errors and how you can also catch your own errors. And the reason we want to cover that is we want to be able to, as you see there in your objectives, log errors and manage an error stack. What this really means is we want to be able to catch errors that are given back to us from the database, but also there may be times we want to generate our own errors. And those errors, we may not necessarily want to stop the execution of the program. Maybe we simply just want to log them, tuck them away for us to look at later. Or maybe it's an auditing system. We want to be able to audit what a user has done without them knowing that things have been logged or errors have been triggered. So that's the objectives from this week. All the code is going to be written for you. You're just going to have to kind of reverse engineer it and tweak parts of it. Because this week is just giving you that light introduction to what error handling is, what these concepts are, and what it looks like so you can learn how to code it for yourself. So let's cover some key points. Now this week we're covering some concepts that you've already learned. We've already covered, what a cursor is, what SQL collections are, and from CIT 225 you should already know, what an update statement is, what an insert statement is. One thing that's not listed here on the bullet points though that will be new is what a procedure is. You've only lightly seen what these are in some codes that we've had you copy and paste and run, and also from some of your chapter readings. So reading through the Lab 6 instructions, this is the general idea that you should get out of it. The first part is the help section code at the top of the lab. You should be able to review and understand this help section code. And I'm actually going to cover that in this video in the next part. We're going to walk through that help section code and make some tweaks to it that are actually not on the lab instructions. The next part is we need to review and understand the lab description code. So this is the preparation script. Again, this script has been written for you. It's going to make some changes to your database. Some of them are a little more advanced than you may have seen in the past, but that's okay. You don't need to create this code yourself. We've given it to you, and we just ask that you review it, pick it apart, and seek to understand what it's doing at each step. Because you have had CIT 225 and the last few labs of CIT 325, you're prepared to understand everything that's going on in that script. The third part and the last part is really a simple alteration. We ask you, once you've reviewed these two parts and you understand the code and they're working correctly in your environment, to go ahead and change part of it. We want you to alter two parts of that code. And once you do that, you simply rerun the code that's been given to you with your alterations, and you should see everything that's printed there in the test case in your instructions. So it's a very quick rundown of what Lab 6 is about and what we hope that you learn out of it. So let me go ahead and switch over now to the actual code. We're going to run through the help section code for Lab 6. Okay, so here's the code. I actually labeled the code as part A, B, and C because if you look through the help section on the lab, it's actually split into three parts for you. So this is part A, and I've gone ahead and added a few things, and I want to walk you through some of those changes that I've made here. So the first thing is this giant warning that I've added to this file on the top. This is actually very important. You've been reminded this concept at the start of the year. You were also reminded of this concept when you took CIT 225. There are previous labs set up and build your table potentially for future labs to build upon. And this is one of those cases. Lab 5 does things to your database, adds things to your database that we're expecting to be there. So I've commented these out, but let me go ahead and bring them back up. And you can read this error file or this warning, when you get a copy of this file. But basically what it runs down to is you have to run your Lab 5 code. So what I'm doing is I went ahead and called it in. Now this way, the way I have it written, will not work for you. With your setup, you'll probably have to go out a directory because you should be in your Lab 6 for this lab. You have to navigate into your Lab 5 and then call your Lab 5. Now, I do not believe this works. I do not think you can use relative paths the way I've done it here in this video. That I need to check on. But the simplest way is you can just do what I've done. I've copied in my Lab 5 file, to my lab 6 folder. That way I can just call it with one simple command like this. Then you need to run the lab 6 prep. If you do not have lab 5 running correctly, or you do not call it in to your lab 6 file, you will not be able to solve this lab. This lab relies on lab 5 running first. You just have to run it so it alters the database to a certain point. Then you run the lab 6 preparation script that you've been given from the lab instructions. And again, it won't run if you don't run lab 5 first. Once you run both of those, so you can actually just make your lab 6 file and all you put in it is these 2 lines. Once you've run both of those in that order, you can go ahead and comment them out. You'll be fine. And the reason that is this file, I've made sure to drop and to delete everything from the database that we insert and that we add. That way you don't need to use a rollback, call previous labs, or run your recreation seed scripts. By ensuring that I drop everything, all the changes we make, you can simply keep running the script over and over again. Now, I will warn you now that this will mess up your sequencing, so your ID numbers will be off for future labs if you keep running this over and over and over again and never run the lab 5 and the lab 6 prep again. So just make sure once you have this lab working 100%, you remove the comments and put back in your lab 5 call in and your lab 6 prep call in. By doing that, this will run all correctly one single time through, and your sequences will be back on track. Now let me walk you through this. So the first part, it's a conditional drop, it's mentioned there, that drops the NC error table that we're making. And I'm going to cover what that is, what part A is all about in just a second, but I also want to walk you through some of this. Now this, you'll notice, are just teeny tiny PL/SQL anonymous blocks, and they have exception handlers to them. You'll notice though the exceptions do nothing. What I'm simply doing is I'm avoiding having all these extra error messages printed out to the console. You'll notice when you look through some of your log files, especially the log file for the lab 6 prep, that you might see parts in there where it says, hey, warning or error, we weren't able to drop this, we weren't able to drop that. That's simply because it didn't exist. You can't drop something that's not there. And so I went ahead and put them inside these PL/SQL blocks. You don't have to do that. For example, drop table NC error. Let me copy that. I can paste that right here, add a semicolon to the end, and that's valid. That's totally valid. It'll run. I'll get a message sent back to me though if that table doesn't exist, but it's not a fatal error. The rest of the script will continue to run. Now, the reason they have to be one by one is if there is accidentally some sort of fatal error or some issue that does happen, the exception block will get triggered. So if I have 3 things happening in here, but one of them throws a fatal error, the rest won't run. And we don't want that to happen. So this is why they're all by themselves. Another thing I have down here, and this is a bit overkill, but I wanted to demo it, is I'm deleting from the item table where an item barcode equals this particular barcode. What I wanted to show you here is that we're escaping our single quotes. So this outside single quote, I'm going to highlight it right now, that's the close of this execute immediate statement. Right here's the opening. But I have to have single quotes around that barcode. So if I paste it on this line, essentially what the computer is doing when it sees line 52, when it's compiling and running through this code, execute immediate, it's going to say execute this SQL command, and because this was escaped, because I had 2 of them, it's going to replace it with the correct syntax, a single one, and then it's going to go ahead and run this command. That's basically how the computer's mind, so to speak, is working when it sees this line of code, line 52. So that's just a simple concept of escaping your single quotes that I wanted to show you. Now let's actually get to the lab itself. So from this point on, this is code that you should be familiar with. This was right in your lab instructions. Now the whole point of this part, part A, is we're showing you how to log data into a table using a procedure. And procedures are something that is new, that you may not have used before. Your chapter reading has covered what a procedure is, and now we're visually showing you. We want to walk you through this code so you can see this is what a procedure is. This is its structure. This is how it works. Now, again, the rest of Part A is meant to demonstrate creating the logging table and the stored procedure that handles writing to that logging table for us. So if we come down here, and again, it's your responsibility to kind of pick apart this code and see what's happening. There's plenty of comments in it, and also combined with your chapter reading, it'll help you understand how to set up a procedure. You'll notice here, create or replace procedure. By doing that, create or replace procedure, we don't need to do one of those drop statements that I showed you at the top of this file, because it'll go ahead and drop it here. Now, record errors, that's the name we're giving it. But when we're making a procedure, it's very similar. There are differences, so again, turn to your chapter reading, but it's very similar to a function from another programming language. Basically, we want to be able to pass in parameters, and that's what these are down here. We want to be able to pass in some data, some parameters, and we want it to handle it. We want it to do things for us. Now, this function, so to speak, this procedure, again, there is a difference between them. This procedure, record errors, is now stored in the database. So until we specifically say, hey, drop that procedure, forget about it, or update it with a replace statement, it's always going to exist in the database, and we can now call it. We can call record errors and have it process our data. And that's what you're going to see down here. Again, please read the comments. We're not going to spend a lot of time in this video running through exactly everything it does. One thing that's very, very important, I'm highlighting it right here, is this pragma autonomous transaction. That's very important, and your lab reading covers what that is. You can also look it up in the index or the appendices. So down here in our begin block, you'll see what we're doing is we're actually inserting. Inside this procedure, we're running an insert statement, and this is just a simple insert statement that you're used to from CIT 225. And we're inserting data that has been passed in to the procedure. And so you'll notice here that we can assign stuff, or we could also, if you think about the business logic behind this, we can run some checks here. You know, a user can pass in some data and we can run checks on it to make sure that, hey, is this the type of data we're expecting? Is this the format we're expecting? If it's not, we can either go back and warn the user, or maybe we can fix the data and format it the way we are expecting before we run this insert, before we try to put the data into the table down here, this part that I'm highlighting. And then down here, you'll see us actually executing it. Again, this is just a very, very simple anonymous PL SQL block, and all we do is we call that procedure that we just made, and we give it some data. In this case, we're creating an error. We're saying, you know, this is the error that we were able to catch, or our own custom error that happened, and we want to log it into this table so we can review it later. And the reason you might want to do that really comes apparent when you think about auditing. You know, if you work at a bank or really any database, you want to audit certain transactions, certain things people try to do. If they're trying to withdraw money or send money, or maybe they're making changes to a user account, we can silently log that into a logging table that we can review or that we can audit later, so we can see, well, who really made that change, or who really tried to send money to this person, who tried to pull out that much money. That's the point, one of the reasons of having a procedure. In this case, we're just using it to record some errors. We want it to be a simple error stack, a simple logging table where we can run through the stack of errors that happened when we ran our program. And then down here, this is our simple select statement that's going to go ahead and grab any records, in this case, only this one that I'm highlighting, from that error table that we've made. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into my console real quick. And I've already logged in, so all I have to do is go ahead and run this lab 6. So we'll go ahead and run that, and there you go. You see everything worked correctly. If you scroll up through this printout, you're going to see this a lot, and that comes from that block of code I was explaining at the top. Instead of seeing like, oh, error, that table didn't exist, all I see is a simple, hey, your procedure completed successfully. Now if I go all the way to the bottom, I get my printout from the error table. Now this obviously isn't the whole error table. We just simply wanted to grab a little part of it to make sure that this code was running and that it worked correctly. So let me go ahead and minimize that. And I'm going to copy in now part B. Okay, so now we have part B here, and part B is meant to demonstrate the same concept as part A, but it adds a few more rules to the process. So again, we're making a brand new procedure, and you'll notice that here, create procedure, insert item. In this case, you'll notice that, hey, we're missing that or replace. And the reason or replace isn't here is I actually dropped it at the top of this file. I already made sure to drop the insert item procedure. I would prefer that we have or replace here, but just to demonstrate the concept that there's different ways to do it, it's not there, it's actually at the top of the file. So part B, what else is it meant to do? Well, this code, and you'll again need to pick this apart and read the comment, but what you should get out of this is that this code ensures that you can only insert item type and rating agency ID foreign keys when they match. That means we're enforcing some business logic. We're making sure that, hey, this data has to be valid and it has to match up. We need to make sure that you're not trying to enter stuff that you shouldn't and that you're not breaking the database's relationships. If you enter something in one column that's supposed to have a foreign key that exists in another, we want to enforce that. We also want to make sure it matches up. We don't want to just do a simple like, hey, this is a record. I looked at this column and I was able to find that this ID does exist. Well, that's okay, but what if I'm being fraudulent about it? What if I'm just using an ID that does exist, but it's not for the right type of item I'm trying to insert or the type of transaction I'm trying to do? In this case, it's the item type and the rating agency ID foreign keys. We're making sure, hey, they have to match up. They have to be the same type of item. And so that sounds very complex and very long, but as you pick apart this code and read through it, you'll notice that it's actually it's just a very simple process. We're just doing some very simple checks. And we also have, again, as I mentioned at the start of this video, cursors here. We have several cursors, and you should read through those. You should pick apart that code and read the comments to see what they're actually doing. Right here, you'll notice in this cursor, it's line 195 to 199 is the comment. This cursor is enforcing some of that business logic that I just broke down and just talked to you about. And then down here at the bottom, again, we're going to have that insert statement. Now, this is a single procedure, meaning you call it once for every item you're trying to insert. So this is, again, building upon the last example. Part A is worried about inserting into that little air table that we made. This part is worried about inserting into the item table. And again, we can go ahead and run that. Now in this case, we're going to add this DVD into that item table. So let me go ahead and open that. And we'll just do up arrow and run it again. And there you go. You'll notice that we have that DVD now inserted into the table. The procedure handled doing that for us and checking that everything matched up and was valid according to the rules we wanted to enforce against our database. Now, though, let's pull this all together. Let me fast forward a bit here, and we're going to copy in part C. Okay, so now we have part C here, and again, we have some conditional drops happening. Instead of putting it all the way at the top of the file, it's left at the part that it belongs to. So we're doing some conditional drops, but what else? What's the purpose of part C? When you read through this code, you'll notice that we're creating a new procedure called insert items. So notice that's items, plural. There's an S on the end. Part B, we're doing a simple insert item procedure. It's handling one thing at a time. So the goal for this part is this new procedure runs a very simple loop that is in turn calling the procedure that we wrote from part B. So this new procedure, part C's procedure, calls part B for us. And you'll wonder, well, why do we need two separate procedures? What's the point? Well, it's meant to make using the database and interacting with it a lot easier. What we can do now is we can instead pass in a collection, whether it's objects or array or however we choose to do it. In this case, we use objects. We can pass in a collection of data and have that inserted into the table for us. So essentially, think about this business model. Remember, our database, part of it, is to be a rental store, a DVD store. So in this case, say that we got a new shipment of DVDs in, and instead of having to enter them, one by one and checking every time that I did it right and that everything got inserted, I can simply make a little object of all the new DVDs I got, and then I can call the insert items procedure, and it's going to handle inserting all those DVDs for me and making sure everything's correct. And then because we have that error logging table, and this is the part that you're going to change, if there are any errors, if I did enter anything wrong in this big collection of DVDs that I just got, it'll get logged to the table, and then I can look through and figure out, okay, I made a mistake on just a couple of DVDs, and I can go ahead and fix that. So that's the behind the scenes like business logic. That's the concept behind why we're writing this code. So let's walk through that. All we're doing is we're making a new procedure, and it's right here, the insert items procedure. We also made a new type, an item object type. And again, this is simply so I can make a big group of items. I can say, here's my collection of 20 brand new DVDs that I need to add to the store. Put them in that collection, and then down here you'll notice that we go ahead and call it. Right here, this part that I'm highlighting. We go ahead and call it, and here's our collection. We just wrote it all in line. And say, here's all the brand new DVDs, please get it added. Go call the correct procedures and make sure everything's correct and add them. And if there's something that's not correct, log an error so we know that it wasn't added, that some error was triggered. You'll also notice that I wrote my delete statement right here. Before I'm calling those procedures, I'm deleting the DVDs that I know that I'm about to enter into the database. Again, remember I'm doing that so this code can be rerun over and over again without needing to do any rollbacks or running the seed creation scripts. And then if we come down here, again, you already know roughly how this process is working. It's calling that procedure for us. Down here, now we say, okay, go ahead and check item table, and we use a regular expression in the where clause. We want to pull out only those new DVDs that we just created. And in this case, that regular expression starts with born, because all we've added this whole time in all these examples, part A, B, and C, we've added the new Jason Bourne movies to the database. So now, if I do up arrow and run that, there you go. Now I have the DVD I already entered before, as well as all the ones we just added from this part that I'm highlighting right here. So at this point, all that's left for you now is to kind of review this whole labs process. Review this video again if you need to. Review the help section, review the prep script code. Once you understand what's going on, how we can correctly call it and send it in parameters, once you understand all that concept and you feel comfortable with it, we're only asking you to do two very simple tweaks. You need to tweak both procedures to log to the error table when an error happens. And the test case is going to actually trigger. It's going to add some more stuff to the database, but it's also going to trigger some errors that should end up in that error table. Instead of making you write these complex procedures, we're showing you how they look like so you can get prepared to write them for yourselves. So at this point, that's the end of this video. Again, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, make sure to post those in iLearn or send an email to your TA or to your instructor.